Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Today we're going to talk about Agile customer service and how organizations can be as nimble with their customer support teams as they are in other aspects of business in our cloud-based world. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Daniel Rodriguez, Chief Marketing Officer at Simplr. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this. So let's get started about talking about the need for more agile customer service. So from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that organizations have in maintaining flexibility and agility in delivery of customer service?
Well, I mean, let's actually rewind to before the pandemic,
Sure, yeah.
because before the pandemic, I think a lot of organizations realized that the customer expectation was changing. Um, you know, Amazon Prime and Amazon Prime Now basically had turned us all into Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. We are, as consumers, we are as impetulant and unwilling to wait as we have ever been, and we are becoming. And data suggests that we are becoming worse and worse. We're becoming more Veruca Salt, like not less. Um, so this was already pressuring companies into providing a customer service level of support that was stretching them, because the traditional fixed resource model, even if you're using an outsourcer that is allowing you to do some form of forecasting, it was just really hard. It was really hard to do things like staffing chat to the level that you need in order to staff chat to make it worthwhile. You got to get back to people within 30 seconds, and you got to do it around the clock. 24/7. And that's really just been very challenging. You then layer on what happened with the pandemic, where if people are working in an outsourced, BPO relationship, there were kind of massive disruptions to some of those business models where people, for connectivity reasons, if you have offshore resources, all the way to just the health and well-being of folks that you were then trying to flex to remote, which was challenging for a lot of organizations. It created a bit of this perfect storm where the customer expectation has accelerated to a point that it was already kind of breaking the model, and then the pandemic came along, and I think in many ways, was the wave that kind of crashed onto the shores for a lot of people and said, we really need to rethink the way that we are doing our customer service, because the customer experience that we're providing is going to leave us as a brand behind. So the pressures, I think, that have then kind of come to bear, have really then made people question a few things. One of them is, hey, are there models that allow us to just be much more flexible? Because fixed staffing to a variable problem, right? I mean, that's really what customer service is. I mean, many companies have cadences of ups and downs, whether it's on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a seasonal basis. There are peaks and valleys that companies have. And so it just becomes very difficult to actually be providing high quality and consistent customer service in a fixed model. And even though we think that some of that model has the capacity to be variable, because again, we can do some projections and we can say, well, we can go up or down a little bit in the future. The reality is we aren't flexible tomorrow. We're not flexible if something happened tomorrow. We really aren't, right? And the pandemic, I think, then really put a spotlight on that. So the desire, I think, for many companies to be flexible from a customer service standpoint, so that we live up to the expectation of our customers, we aren't leaving revenue on the table. That's obviously one of the biggest kind of reasons here. And then I think the other one, around flexibility is just it's not really cost effective to be making permanent or semi-permanent future cost decisions that you don't really know if you're getting right. And I mean, this should obviously thematically with your podcast here about being agile, you know your customer service historically hasn't really been all that agile. And in many ways, I think what we have done as a company in this now CX movement that we are very much a part of, I think is coming and saying it's okay to completely variabilize and be completely agile with your customer service, because you can still create a great customer experience. You can have really high CSAT scores and deliver a better a better, faster response time type of experience that will ultimately be better for the customer, but it's also better for the bottom line.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that. What does that look like? What does that more agile approach to customer service look like? And your company Simplr sounds like there's you're doing some interesting things in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it means a couple of things, right? The first is that you have to, many companies are looking at ways that they can create more flexibility and responsiveness. And I think the predominant angle that people have taken over the past few years, and I think there's been a lot of hype and there's been a lot of investment here in the space, has been around automation, right? How can we get auto responses? How can we get bots to be helping us to lower our overall cost structure and be more responsive to customers? And the promise of what automation was helping to bring, from a, I think, cost mitigation and also providing just a general amount of agility. I think the promise has not yet fully been delivered for a lot of organizations. I think we've spoken to enough people to feel really strongly that it looks like there should be, and it depends on your business. It depends on some of the types of customer inquiries you're getting. We work with a lot of e-commerce retail companies, so we have a lot of strong use cases in the in that space, in the quick serve restaurant space. But you can get some auto response happening for, call it, 10 to 20% of your overall inquiries, and that really does create, I think, some strong advantages. But if you're trying to lean on automation to be your primary answer to how do we become more agile, you're going to really end up not just disappointing your customers. I think you're going to piss them off, because and I've had this experience. I don't know, Greg, if you feel the same way, but how many times have you gone on and there is basically the phone tree hell equivalent
Yeah,
going on like a chatbot, where you just
totally.
want to representative, is there an actual person that I can actually talk to, because this thing isn't working. It's not smart enough yet. It doesn't have the right logic kind of capabilities. It's not empathetic, certainly, enough to me. So I think there's a strong desire for people to say, okay, well, then what else can we do? And the answer is, well, there are actually great people that are out there in the world that, if they just had access to a technology that would allow them to become instantly trained on your brand and your voice and your response types, then you could tap into that human cloud network. And that's what we've built. We have built a technology that allows companies to basically tap into a human cloud network of people that allow them to be both instantly flexible, but most importantly, rapidly responsive to a very large percentage of a customer's inquiry types, which then when you look at your kind of, hey, here's my pie of customer inquiries, it really allows you to say, in the old world, the old way of doing things and that fixed staffing model that we had, and we were we were having to commit a certain percentage of our spend for a certain percentage of our overall volume. And we were getting it somewhat right sometimes, and there was inefficiency there. And we're saying now in the new model, you're probably doing about 10 to 20% automation. You're probably doing another, call it 60 to 70% of your inquiries could be tapping into the human cloud network. And then you've got a small percentage that are for high escalation, high touch point issues, which require an internal team, but that internal team is a fraction potentially of what the overall fixed cost structure used to be, so that the overall spend is 90% variable and 10% fixed, which probably for many companies flips that fixed to variable number completely on its head.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think there's a number of things that are interesting here. So I mean, one, just the overall move in the global workforce to, let's call it more, whether it's gig work or just more individual work and independent work and things like that. Which I think there's plenty of great people out there. To your point, that just need the resources and the tools to be able to do the work, and they're certainly capable of doing that. I think the other component to this is just from the company standpoint. You can throw as much resources and dollars as you can at certain things like customer service, but it doesn't necessarily mean that customer satisfaction is going to get better. So in other words, you could hire the greatest staff in the world and have the greatest team or whatever ready and on standby, but a lot of customers actually want on demand service, or they have different needs, and so on and so forth. So I think, this approach makes tons of sense because it's it's on demand in the truest sense of the term, in that, it's exactly what customers need when they need it, as well as what, companies aren't spending too much, they're spending just enough. And so I mean, I think in theory that sounds great. In practice, what are some of the KPIs that you're held to, and that companies should be thinking of when, in terms of this? I mean, I'm sure customer satisfaction or NPS are in there, but what are some of the things that you're measured by?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's looking at CSAT,
Yeah.
and we are certainly looking at that as a KPI, and having SLAs around that. Um, we we oftentimes are expected. We want people to expect us to have KPIs and service level agreements actually on those KPIs around first response time and time to resolution. FRT is great and all, but if you don't end up really able to be helpful to somebody, you kind of trick yourself into thinking that
Yeah.
you've solved the problem that you just started to solve,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think FRT is a great metric for bot companies to go around and tell people, yeah, you should just be, lowering FRT. But then you look at your actual time to resolution, and it's like days because the 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 bot wasn't able to actually be helpful. And then they told you, well, we'll get back to you when we've pushed this message via chat into the email queue, and the internal team
Right.
is just swamped with emails, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of a practical implication of kind of what happens there. We really love to see people and help people communicate the repeat purchase rate metric. I think it's a really powerful metric because if you are able to, if you're able to show internal, internally, you're able to show to your, whether it's the CMO, whether it's to the CEO, that by staffing chat 24/7 on some of your product pages, some of your pre-purchase pages, not just on the support part of your website. And we've got great data that shows this. We can link to this in the notes, but you can go to our website and see some of these use cases. But it's absolutely phenomenal to basically prove that you're getting a $5 or $10 out of every dollar you're spending staffing chat in net new revenue. Huge lift, on not a huge, necessarily spend basis here, but I mean, just in terms of like the ROI on what you're actually looking at here, makes a material difference. I mean, these acquisition costs are obviously very high for a lot of people. And it's critically important that you can show that you are driving acquisition. And so conversion and repeat purchase rate are really important metrics that we see a lot of our customers measuring, and then we are attaching those metrics onto the efforts of our human cloud network.
Yeah. So let's return to this the overall concept of human cloud, and certainly your application of it in customer service is really interesting and fascinating to me. I think it's long overdue and being implemented like that. Why do you think more organizations haven't embraced this approach so far? I mean, what's standing in the way of doing this, and I guess embracing in a broader sense?
Yeah. And you use the word gig. I'm not averse to the word gig, certainly, but there has been really this kind of there was a gig 1.0, and there's now, I think we are operating in a gig 2.0 model. And so let me kind of like
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit because several years ago, there were a few companies that basically came along and said, "Hey, we're going to tap into gig workers. They're going to be 1099 contract workers, and we are going to allow you to quote unquote create variable spend into your customer service model." They were kind of preaching this and saying this. Now, the way it was working, there were kind of two approaches that a couple of different companies were taking in the market, and it looks like neither of these approaches have been particularly scalable for companies, nor overall successful. And it's something to acknowledge and to learn from, and that we have learned from, certainly in building the type of company that we have. So the first is that you have contract workers, but then you basically treat them, you make them act like employees. You make them set up their own LLCs, get their own equipment, train themselves, and then set up and schedule hours, right? And so you end up with what looks on its surface like a gig model, but it then kind of performs like more of a fixed model, because you're still asking people to work certain hours, and then you get locked into certain staffing, right? So you
Got it.
aren't
Yeah.
fully really variabilizing the ability to meet peaks or valleys of your actual demand. And there's also like kind of like challenging, like negative labor components that are going on with that type of model, where you're, I don't know if you're treating people basically as well as they should be treated, and there's articles that have been written about that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Right. And so the second way that we've seen companies then go about and try to do this in the gig 1.0 model was you then take experts or brand advocates and you sell them back to the company. Basically, hey, what we're going to do is we are going to facilitate people that know your brand well, and we're going to facilitate them interacting with your customers. And what has played out there is that If you aren't a big enough company that has a large enough number of fans, right? You have a limited pool of people that you can then tap into. So you're kind of capped in some way naturally. And for some brands, there is no market for this. They just don't have enough people to tap into to do this,
Yeah.
right? And then the second thing is the quality and the breadth of inquiries that somebody can actually end up being helpful with is actually quite limited. You're not provisioning people into parts of your technology stack because of security reasons, so they can only kind of handle certain things. Hey, they're getting paid or not getting paid, but they're trying to be helpful, and it's all turns into basically like you kind of didn't get what you wanted out of it, and your customers weren't fully happy, and you didn't really solve for the big problem, which is, hey, how can we variabilize a large percentage of our volume and do it in a high quality way? You don't get there, and you can't actually get there. You just become kind of naturally capped out. In Gig 2.0, what we're talking about is using technology to tap into opening the aperture around what inquiries can be taken. And that fundamentally then unlocks a large amount of value for companies, because you are then now saying, hey, this isn't the gig isn't, gig, what ended up happening, I think, is that gig became synonymous with kind of niche, like maybe we can do 10% of our volume with gig, and maybe it'll work well or maybe it won't for our business, but it's like not going to really fundamentally move the needle for us or rethink the way that we do our
Yeah.
customer support. And Gig 2.0, which we very much feel like we are playing into here, and so as long as you're talking about Gig 2.0, I'm like, yeah, I'm on board. Gig 2.0 is saying use technology to open up the number of inquiries that can be taken, the percentage take, right, that can be made, so that you are then truly restructuring the way that you're doing customer support. And so yeah, we do think that we do think there's been an evolution just in this is really only in the past 5 years of the gig model and the use of technology.
Well, one last question before we wrap up here. So, using this, it's a combination of humans as well as AI and machine learning. Simpler's been doing this for a little while here. What's your perspective on just how this interaction works? I mean, there's a lot of people talking about the machines are going to replace us, and I for one am not. I don't subscribe to that. Although I certainly parts of people's roles are going to be replaced by automation and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but what? How do you think that humans and AI can work better together? I mean, do you think some of the things that you're doing are kind of proving that model? And just what's your general thoughts there?
We're writing a book right now, and as part of writing this book, I interviewed an author, Matthew Coatney, who wrote a book about the gig economy, and he was, it's about AI and the gig economy, and he was basically saying, you look across broad swaths of the labor pool, and what technology is doing is basically empowering workers to be able to work on their time.
Yeah.
And this was, in no way in the book was he even ever specifically talking about customer service. But when I then interviewed him and talked about it, he was like, "Oh, I totally understand how this is applicable to customer service because what we are basically doing is saying technology, the AI here, right? The AI is specifically being used to allow somebody to train up in a moment to be able to respond well to a customer service inquiry. And a lot of brands, a lot of people that we then talk to, they're immediately skeptical of that. And I understand why, because that has never happened before. There hasn't been technology before that basically allows somebody to know how to answer their tickets. It normally has to be this, training process that people go through, and that they have to get trained up on the internal systems. And this hasn't existed before, but this is now where things are, where people can not only use AI to then get smart so that they can become a useful brand advocate for a company, but that technology generally, right? Because this isn't the AI part, this is the connectivity part, right? This is using APIs to tap into systems. The technology is actually allowing people to then be wherever they want to be, right? So, and we are then facilitating that so that, if it's a military spouse who's located on the other side of the world, they are actually able to flip open their laptop and start taking tickets for a variety of different brands right there through by accessing the Simplr platform, and get paid for it right there, right? Resolving customers' inquiries, because it's all about resolution. It's not just about first response. So that's what I think is kind of happening, with our business and the way it's disrupting the customer service space. But it's happening broadly within the economy, where people are able to work jobs, and it's increasingly white collar, by the way, types of jobs where you're taking a role, and it is facilitated by technology. So to the extent that technology is going to be replacing people, I think that the promise of bots is a bit maybe overhyped. Are there some percentage, I would say low double digits percentage of volume that companies should be looking to automate, and therefore are those, are machines taking people's jobs in those situations? Yes. Yeah, I believe that. Will that become 80% for most companies over the next 5 years? No. No, I fundamentally do not believe that. But will technology reshape the way that people are able to work and be productive and be contributing members of a company's mission, even if they are not employees at that company and physically at that office? Yeah, that's the power, I think, of AI in this gig economy space.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
I would say, we're trying to do a lot of great stuff over here at Simplr, and putting out a lot of useful content. We're building a community for CX professionals called CX Life. So check out CX Life. A lot of great resources for bettering yourself, learning, growing your career, getting promotions. And if you're interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn, you can find me pretty easily on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Daniel Rodriguez, Chief Marketing Officer at Simplr, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to the Agile World with Greg Kihlstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.